How much of your life have you wasted trying to be liked? Think about it. How many decisions have you made not because you truly wanted to, but because you were afraid of what others might think if you didn't? How many dreams have you buried because you feared judgment? How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no, just to avoid disappointing someone? If you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting yourself to fit in, it's not because you're lost. It's because you've handed over the keys to your life in exchange for approval. And the truth is, you'll never feel truly free until you stop living for everyone else's acceptance. We all crave approval. It's human nature to want to feel seen, valued, and appreciated. From a young age, we're conditioned to seek it. When we do something good, we're rewarded with praise. When we fall short, we're met with disappointment. Over time, we learn that approval equals love, acceptance, and validation, and so we start chasing it. We tell ourselves that if others are pleased with us, we must be doing something right. If they approve of us, we must be worthy. But here's where the trap lies. When your emotional state becomes tied to external approval, you give others control over your sense of self-worth. Your highs and lows are no longer determined by your inner compass, but by the unpredictable and often inconsistent opinions of those around you. That's a dangerous place to be, because it means you no longer own your emotional state. Other people do. When someone compliments you, it feels good. It's a shot of dopamine. You feel important, valued, maybe even loved. But what happens when that same person criticizes you or ignores you? Suddenly, that feeling of worth disappears. Your emotional state plummets. You feel anxious, questioning whether you did something wrong or if you're not enough. That's the problem with tying your sense of self to approval. You place your emotional well-being in the hands of people who might not understand you, appreciate you, or even care about you. And the worst part? You might not even realize it's happening. You start living reactively, adjusting your behavior and your choices based on how people respond. If they like you, you feel secure. If they don't, you spiral. You're no longer in control, the world is. And this need for approval doesn't just affect how you feel, it shapes how you live. You start filtering your decisions through the lens of what others will think. You hesitate to speak your mind because you fear being judged. You stay in relationships that aren't serving you because you don't want to be disliked. You pursue career paths that don't align with your values because they impress other people. You start crafting a life that looks good from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. And why? Because you've convinced yourself that being accepted is more important than being true to yourself, that fitting in matters more than authenticity. But deep down, you know that's not true. Deep down, you feel the weight of that misalignment. It's why you feel restless even when things are going well. It's why you feel empty even when others admire you, because approval from others can't fill the space that's meant to be filled by self-acceptance. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly monitor how others perceive you, to always wonder if you're saying the right thing, wearing the right clothes, making the right decisions. It's a never-ending cycle, and the irony is, the more you chase approval, the more fragile your confidence becomes. Because if your self-worth is built on the foundation of other people's praise, it can crumble the moment that praise disappears. That's why even the most successful people can feel deeply insecure. They might have fame, admiration, and recognition, but if they've built their sense of self on that external validation, they're constantly at risk of losing it. The applause can stop, the recognition can fade, and when that happens, they're left with nothing, because they never built a foundation within themselves. The truth is, you can't control how people perceive you. People are unpredictable. Sometimes they'll love you for being yourself, other times they'll criticize you for the exact same thing. You can't win that game. But what you can control is how much power you give those opinions. You can decide to detach your emotional state from the roller coaster of external approval. You can choose to stop seeking your value in other people's reactions and instead anchor it in something unshakable, your own integrity, your own values, your own truth. That's where real peace comes from. When you start defining your worth internally, you no longer need constant reassurance from others. You stop basing your confidence on whether someone compliments you or criticizes you. You start making decisions based on what feels right for you, not what will earn you praise. You become unshakable because you realize that your value isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's determined by the person you choose to be every day. That's where freedom lies, in no longer needing anyone's permission to feel worthy. That's when you can finally breathe, knowing that you don't have to prove anything to anyone, because you've already decided that you're enough. The need for approval has a subtle way of pulling you away from who you truly are. It starts small, adjusting your words to avoid offending someone, toning down your personality to fit in, nodding along with opinions you don't agree with just to avoid conflict. You tell yourself it's harmless. It's just a way to get along with others, to avoid standing out too much. But over time, those small compromises begin to add up. Each time you silence your truth to gain someone's approval, you chip away at your authenticity. You start becoming a version of yourself that's crafted not by your values or your beliefs, but by the reactions and expectations of others. The problem with chasing approval is that it requires you to wear a mask. You have to become adaptable, constantly shaping yourself to fit the room you're in, the people you're with, and the circumstances you face. It's not about being genuine anymore, it's about being liked. If people seem to respond positively when you're agreeable, you lean into that. If they admire your confidence, you amplify it, even if it feels forced. You start living more for the reaction than for the experience itself. Your identity becomes a patchwork of other people's expectations rather than a reflection of who you truly are. And the most dangerous part? After a while, you forget where the mask ends and you begin. You become so used to adapting and shifting that you lose touch with your own instincts. You second-guess yourself. You hesitate when you know exactly what you want to say because you're wondering how it will be received. You say yes when you want to say no because you're afraid of disappointing someone. You mold yourself into the version of you that's easiest for others to accept, and in doing so, you bury the version of you that's most real. Approval is seductive because it feels like a shortcut to belonging. When people approve of you, you feel accepted, valued, even loved. But that sense of connection is shallow if it's based on a version of you that isn't real. If people admire you for the mask you wear, they're not actually admiring you. They're admiring the illusion you've created, and deep down you know it. That's why even when people praise you, you still feel empty. That's why even when you fit in, you feel like you don't belong. Because you've built that connection on shaky ground. It's not rooted in truth. You might feel safe, but you don't feel whole. Authenticity requires vulnerability. It means risking rejection by showing up as your true self. And that's why seeking approval is so tempting. It lets you sidestep that vulnerability. It allows you to present a polished version of yourself instead of the raw, imperfect reality. But at what cost? When you trade authenticity for approval, you lose yourself. You lose the ability to trust your instincts because you're too busy calibrating your choices based on how other people might react. You lose the freedom to express your truth because you're filtering your words through the lens of acceptance. You give up the peace that comes from knowing that you're living in alignment with who you are because you've outsourced that sense of alignment to others. When you chase approval, you become a prisoner to other people's expectations. You can't relax because you're constantly monitoring the emotional temperature of the room. You're trying to figure out who you need to be liked, valued, and accepted. But no matter how hard you try, you can't please everyone. Someone will always disapprove, someone will always criticize, someone will always misunderstand you, and if your sense of self is tied to their approval, you'll spend your life on an emotional roller coaster, rising and falling based on the shifting opinions of people who might not even know you that well. That's why it's so exhausting. That's why no amount of approval ever feels like enough. Because the problem isn't that you need more acceptance. The problem is that you've given away too much of your power. True freedom comes when you stop needing other people to validate you. When you realize that it's better to be disliked for who you truly are than to be loved for who you're pretending to be. When you understand that approval is fleeting, but authenticity is lasting. That's when you reclaim your power. When you stop looking to others for permission to be yourself. The people who truly matter will accept you as you are, and the ones who don't, they were never meant to stay. The need for approval creates a quiet but powerful fear, the fear of rejection and failure. It's not just about wanting to be liked, it's about avoiding the discomfort that comes when someone disapproves of you, or when you don't meet the expectations you've built around yourself. When you chase approval, you become conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to how others perceive you, and that means rejection starts to feel personal. Failure starts to feel like proof that you're not enough. You start avoiding situations where there's even the slightest chance you might be criticized or judged. And that avoidance limits your life more than failure ever could. Think about how many opportunities you've let pass you by because you were afraid of what people might think. How many times have you held back from speaking your mind because you were worried about looking foolish? How many ideas have you abandoned before you even started because you were afraid they wouldn't be good enough? When you seek approval, rejection becomes a threat. Not just to your ego, but to your sense of identity. If you believe that your value comes from being accepted, then any form of rejection feels like confirmation that you don't measure up. And that fear paralyzes you. It keeps you in the safe zone, where you don't risk embarrassment or failure, but you also don't grow. Fear of rejection turns into self-censorship. You become hesitant, second-guessing every decision. You analyze conversations after they've ended, wondering if you said the wrong thing. You become overly cautious, sticking to what's comfortable instead of what's possible. You choose safety over authenticity because you'd rather blend in than stand out and risk being misunderstood. But the irony is, the more you chase approval, the more rejection seems to find you. People can sense when you're not being real. They can feel when your words are calculated rather than genuine. When you're too focused on being liked, you lose the natural confidence that draws people toward you in the first place. You start sacrificing your integrity to avoid conflict, and that makes you lose respect, not only from others, but from yourself. Approval seeking makes you hyper-aware of failure. Every setback feels magnified, because you're not just measuring the result. You're measuring how others perceive the result. If you fail, you worry about looking weak. If you succeed, you worry about whether you'll be able to maintain that success. There's no peace because even when things go well, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and when things don't go well, the fear becomes louder. You wonder what people are saying behind your back. You question if you're cut out for the path you're on. You hesitate before making your next move because you're already imagining the worst-case scenario. Not just the failure itself, but the humiliation that would come with it. The truth is, failure is inevitable. Rejection is inevitable. No matter how careful you are, no matter how hard you try to anticipate every outcome, you're going to face moments where you fall short. That's not a reflection of your value. That's a reflection of being human. The problem isn't the failure itself. The problem is the meaning you attach to it. When you seek approval, rejection becomes proof that you're not good enough. But when you stop tying your self-worth to external validation, rejection becomes information. It becomes data. It tells you what worked and what didn't. It points you toward a better strategy, a new approach, a different path. When you stop fearing rejection, you unlock freedom. You stop playing small. You stop holding back your ideas because you're not afraid of someone disagreeing with you. You stop avoiding opportunities because you're not worried about failing. And, ironically, when you're no longer desperate for approval, people are more drawn to you. Confidence isn't about never failing, it's about being unshaken when you do. It's about knowing that your value isn't determined by other people's reactions. It's about having the courage to be disliked, not because you want to be disliked, but because you refuse to compromise your truth just to keep others comfortable. Seeking approval makes you live in constant defense mode. You're always managing perceptions, trying to anticipate how people will react to you. But that's exhausting and ultimately impossible. You can't control how others see you. You can't force people to understand you. What you can control is how much of yourself you're willing to give up for acceptance. What you can control is how you respond when you're misunderstood, criticized, or overlooked. When you stop fearing rejection, you stop seeking approval. And when you stop seeking approval, you finally give yourself permission to live fully, to speak boldly, to create without hesitation. That's where real strength comes from. Confidence isn't built by hearing others tell you that you're good enough. It's built by knowing you are, even when no one else says a word. True confidence comes from self-acceptance, not from validation. When you depend on validation to feel confident, your sense of worth is unstable. It rises and falls based on the opinions and reactions of others. One day you feel like you're on top of the world because you got praise or recognition. The next day, a single critical comment can make you question everything about yourself. That's not confidence. That's dependence. Confidence doesn't come from being liked or approved of. It comes from being at peace with who you are, even when others don't understand or agree with you. Think about how easy it is to feel confident when things are going well, when people are applauding you, when you're getting positive feedback, when you're succeeding. Confidence seems effortless. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when you face a setback or when someone challenges your work? If your confidence evaporates in those moments, it was borrowed confidence to begin with. It was borrowed confidence, dependent on the validation of others. Real confidence is steady. It's not tied to the highs or the lows. It's not inflated by praise or diminished by criticism. It's grounded in self-acceptance. The quiet understanding that you are enough, regardless of external outcomes. When you seek validation to feel confident, you become reactive. You adjust your behavior based on how others respond to you. If they like you, you lean into that version of yourself. If they don't, you start to doubt yourself. You start questioning your instincts, wondering if you should change your approach or soften your message. That's not confidence. That's self-negotiation. It's handing over control of your identity to other people. But confidence doesn't require agreement. It doesn't need permission. It comes from standing firmly in who you are, even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes others uncomfortable. Confidence is saying, I know who I am, and I'm not here to please everyone. Self-acceptance means embracing your strengths and your flaws without judgment. It means understanding that you are not defined by your mistakes or your successes. When you accept yourself fully, you don't fear rejection because rejection doesn't threaten your identity. If someone disagrees with you, it doesn't shake you because your confidence isn't built on external approval. It's built on internal alignment. You stop apologizing for who you are. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to manage people's perceptions because you realize that how they see you has more to do with them than it does with you. Confidence doesn't mean you'll never feel insecure or uncertain. It means you know how to navigate those moments without losing yourself. It means you can walk into a room and not need to be the center of attention to feel valuable. It means you can hear criticism without internalizing it as truth. It means you can fail publicly without letting it define you. True confidence is quiet. It's not about being loud or dominant. It's about being unshaken. It's the ability to stand in your truth even when no one validates it. It's knowing that your value is not up for negotiation. When you rely on validation for confidence, you give away your power. You let other people decide how you feel about yourself. If they like you, you feel good. If they criticize you, you feel small. But when your confidence comes from self-acceptance, you hold the power. You decide how you see yourself. You decide how you respond. Confidence rooted in self-acceptance allows you to take risks because you're not afraid of how others will perceive you. It gives you the freedom to fail because failure doesn't threaten your identity. It teaches you. It makes you stronger. When you accept yourself fully, you don't need people to agree with you because you're not looking for approval. You're looking for truth. Think about the people you admire most. Are they the ones who blend in or the ones who stand out? Confidence isn't built by seeking consensus. It's built by showing up as your true self without needing validation to feel whole. The most confident people aren't the ones trying to be liked by everyone. They're the ones comfortable enough with themselves to be disliked. They don't adjust their values to fit the room. They let the room adjust to them. And that's not arrogance. That's alignment. That's knowing who you are and refusing to trade your authenticity for acceptance. Confidence from validation is fleeting. Confidence from self-acceptance is permanent. When you stop chasing approval, you find peace. You stop overthinking every interaction. You stop replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you said the right thing. You stop holding back because you're not afraid of being misunderstood. You give yourself permission to take up space. You give yourself permission to be imperfect. And you realize that real confidence isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about being at peace with who you are, no matter what anyone else thinks. Freedom begins the moment you stop living for the approval of others. It's the moment you realize that you are not here to meet other people's expectations or fulfill their idea of who you should be. When you live for approval, you're constantly adjusting yourself to fit into a mold that wasn't created for you. You shape your decisions around what others might think. You hesitate to speak your mind because you don't want to offend anyone. You water down your dreams because you're afraid they'll seem too ambitious. But that's not living. That's performing. That's existing in a cage, waiting for someone else to tell you you're allowed to fly. Real freedom begins when you decide that you don't need permission to be yourself. Living for approval is exhausting because it's never enough. No matter how much praise you get, no matter how many people admire you, it's temporary. The approval you receive today can disappear tomorrow. Someone else's opinion can shift with a single mistake or misunderstanding. And when your sense of self is tied to that approval, you live in constant fear of losing it. You become hyper-aware of how you're being perceived. You measure your worth by how many people are clapping, how many people agree with you, how many people validate your choices. But freedom isn't found in applause. It's found in the quiet confidence of knowing who you are, even when the room is silent. The truth is, you can't live your life for other people and still be free. When you live for approval, you compromise pieces of yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for you. You hold back your opinions because you don't want to upset anyone. You follow a path that feels safe because it's what others expect of you, even when it's not what you want. You silence your instincts because you're more concerned with fitting in than being true to yourself. But the cost of approval is authenticity. The more you try to fit into other people's expectations, the further you drift from your own truth. And that's not freedom, that's self-betrayal. Freedom comes when you stop seeking permission to be yourself. It comes when you realize that you don't need to explain your choices to anyone. You don't need to justify your path. You don't need to soften your truth to make other people comfortable. Real freedom is standing firmly in who you are, even when others don't understand you. It's the ability to make decisions based on your own values and your own intuition, not based on how it will be perceived. It's choosing to be authentic over being liked. It's choosing truth over comfort. It's realizing that the people who matter will respect you for being real, and the ones who can't handle your authenticity were never meant to walk with you anyway. When you live for approval, you give away your power. You let other people decide how you feel about yourself. If they praise you, you feel worthy. If they criticize you, you feel small. That's not freedom, that's dependence. But when you stop chasing approval, you take that power back. You decide how you see yourself. You decide what success means to you. You decide what matters. You stop trying to control other people's perceptions because you understand that their opinions are not your responsibility. You realize that you are not obligated to live up to anyone else's version of success. You are not required to meet anyone else's timeline or follow anyone else's rules. That's freedom. The ability to define your life on your own terms. Freedom isn't about being accepted by everyone. It's about accepting yourself. It's about knowing that you are enough even when others don't understand you. It's about realizing that rejection isn't a reflection of your value. It's a redirection toward alignment. When you stop needing approval, you stop fearing rejection. You stop overthinking every conversation. You stop replaying interactions in your mind, wondering if you said the wrong thing or if you made the wrong impression. You stop needing people to understand you because you're no longer trying to convince them of your worth. You already know your worth, and that knowing creates peace. That knowing creates strength. That knowing creates freedom. You don't owe the world a version of yourself that's easy to digest. You don't need to explain why you chose a different path. You don't need to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. The people who are meant for you will respect you for standing in your truth. They'll admire you for being unapologetically yourself. And the ones who criticize you, the ones who misunderstand you, that's not your burden to carry. Their perception is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to honor your truth. Your responsibility is to show up as your most authentic self, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes others uncomfortable, even when it means standing alone. You cannot be free if you're constantly adjusting yourself to meet other people's expectations. You cannot be free if you're holding back your truth to avoid making others uncomfortable. You cannot be free if you're seeking permission to be yourself. Freedom is found in the decision to stop apologizing for who you are. It's found in the courage to disappoint people if it means staying true to yourself. It's found in the quiet confidence of knowing that your value isn't dependent on external validation. You are already enough. You are already worthy. You are already whole. And the moment you stop chasing approval is the moment you set yourself free.